Hey everyone, I've had some requests from a few of you to do like a walkthrough explanation of my process for recording one of the cover videos that I've been doing. So I picked the recent cover I did of Nine Inch Nails' song Only to kind of talk through why I did things the way I did them, how I approach a song like this to figure out all the parts and record them. So let's dive in. First off, a little bit of background on why I chose Only by Nine Inch Nails. My friend Tom requested that I do a Nine Inch Nails song. Tom, he's someone that I've made music with for many years. We're both really big Nine Inch Nails fans. He actually requested that I do something from Year Zero. We're both of the opinion that Year Zero is a really underrated Nine Inch Nails album. I personally love it. But when I was thinking about it, Year Zero is a very digital album. And the precise sounds that are used on that album are really key to how the whole thing sounds. The feeling that you get from it. The song's identities are really centered around a lot of those more digital sound effects that are being used. So I ended up shifting over to With Teeth as an album in general because With Teeth is a little bit more of a performance album. It feels a little bit more like a standard rock album despite there being some classic Nine Inch Nails electronic and industrial flourishes. That album has a lot more live drums, bass, guitar, things like that. The reason I went with Only in particular is because, first off, it's just a great song that I've loved for a long time, but it's also a little bit different. It gave me an opportunity to try out a vocal style that I would never really have the guts to do on music of my own. For this, and actually for most of the covers I do, I'm honestly going for more of a recreation than like a reinterpretation. Because as a producer, that's a little bit more fun for me. I can kind of take what I'm hearing and see how close I can get to it. How can I try to recreate this recording? I actually read somewhere, I don't know if this is true or not, but it would make sense. I read that Trent was listening to a lot of LCD Sound System at the time that he wrote and recorded this song. It does kind of sound like LCD Sound System filtered through Nine Inch Nails, so naturally you're going to bring your own kind of flavor to it. So the first thing that I do when I'm getting ready to record a cover song is just listen to the song closely and really think about what are the elements that I'm hearing, what are the different layers and components of this song, how do they stack on top of each other, how are they mixed, how are they produced, things like that. And even though I've been listening to this song and the With Teeth album for, 16 years or something, when you go into it with this in mind, you always pick up on things that you never really noticed before. So some things that I noticed when I was listening through it in preparation for this cover is, first off, the drums and bass are very constant. That drum loop gets established and it almost 100% just kind of stays at home base for the entirety of the song. The bass guitar only changes during the choruses, really, so that's very constant as well. And those two elements, the bass and drums, really just establish the entire foundation of the song. Because they're not very performance-based and there's not a lot of dynamics in it, really the entire dynamics of the song is driven by the vocal performance and whatever additional layers, like guitars and synths, for example, are coming in and out of the mix at any given time. It's not really the kind of performance where, you've got like a softly played guitar that then all of a sudden gets louder. It's not like that. It's basically like, oh, I want this song to be a little bit louder. I'm going to throw on a whole new layer. It's more of an additive process than it is a sculpting process. It's not really performance based. So because of that, I felt like I needed to keep things pretty much as they are, because leaving a layer out or changing the way that a layer sounds too significantly would have a really big impact on the song. It would affect the dynamics and the energy and intensity, so it wouldn't even feel like the same song anymore. So I knew that I needed to keep anything I was hearing. If there's a guitar part here, a synth part here, I needed to find some way to represent that in the mix, or else the song would just kind of lose its identity, it would lose its flow, it would lose that dynamic ebbing that happens throughout it. So let's start with the drums. The first thing I record when I'm doing a cover song is almost always the drums, and here on this Nine Inch Nails cover, I just played to the original recording. I put the original song in my software, And then I just went into the next room and played drums along with it. I usually do this. I usually just play to the original recording because it helps to ensure that I'm keeping the tempo and the structure of the song right. I would argue that changing the tempo of a song changes its feeling more than almost anything that you can do, maybe even more so than changing the key. So I almost never change the tempo of songs that I'm covering unless I have a really creative reason to do so. One example where I actually did change the tempo quite a bit was on my Bloody Valentine Come In Alone cover, because I wanted that to be much faster than the original recording, give it a little bit more energy, because I knew that I was going to perform it in a little bit more of a rock mode. Getting into the drums on Only, it very obviously feels like a drum machine to me, or a programmed beat. You can tell by just how impossibly consistent each hit is. Now, I might be wrong about that. I wasn't there for the recording of this song, but just based on the sound that I'm hearing and what I'm picking up on in just the really lack of performance nuance, it does sound like that. Then again, Trent Reznor always gets really good drummers to work on his music, so maybe it was performed and I'm just not picking up on it. But either way, I knew that I was going to want to perform this. So I went and I learned the beat, and this is actually where I made one of the biggest changes is in the beat. Because if you listen to the original beat, there are these hi-hat slides that are happening in the same beat of every measure. So it's kind of this da 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 tss, da 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 tss. If those tss are the open hi-hat, those hi-hat slides. So let me play a clip of the original drums in the intro of the song. You can see there that it's very kind of programmatic. It's doing the same thing over and over again. What I was having trouble with is I'm just really not that great of a drummer. So when I was playing this beat, I was having trouble getting that second hi-hat slide with the double snare hit and the kick drum, the double kick drum leading back into it. So da-da-dun-dun. I wasn't really able to do that with the hi-hat slide at the same time, so I thought, well, I could spend forever trying to learn this and maybe take an opportunity to get a little bit better at the drums, but instead I just kind of cheated and I took a shortcut, and what I did was I just moved that hi-hat slide a beat earlier to be a beat before the double snare hit. And then what I'm doing on the drums on mine is it's a little bit, it's just shifted a little bit, so So just a little bit different there. And it's not a huge significant change, but technically since it's going on for the entire duration of the song, I consider it to be a pretty significant compositional change. Another thing that's changing here is because I'm performing these drums live in a room on a drum kit, you're going to get more of a performance, more of kind of a live room sound. The original, if you recall the samples I just played real quick, the original has a much tighter, smaller kind of drum pad, drum machine sound. So I needed to try to produce my drums to be small and tight rather than big and boomy. Typically when I'm producing drums, I like for there to be a big room sound to them, but that just doesn't really match the sound of the songs here. So what I did was I removed nearly all of the room mic sound that I had. I reduced the overheads pretty significantly because I already had a mic on the hi-hat, so there's not really any cymbal hits during this song except for maybe one spot. So I just removed those for the most part. I removed the reverb and the room sound and tried to make them as small and tight as possible. It still sounds a lot boomier than the original, but I was willing to keep that in. That's something that I think is really fun about doing these covers, though, is that they kind of push you out of your habits and your usual way of doing things, and they kind of force me to think differently about how I'm producing and performing and arranging these songs. So there is one spot in the structure where things actually get mixed up a little bit. And this tripped me up for a while. It took me a little bit to really figure this out, but there's a spot kind of in the middle of the verse, a little bit before they go into the first chorus, where there's half a repeat added to the drum part. So instead of going into that double snare hit, it does two of the bits without that. So I'll play a clip real quick of my drums. So you hear there was an extra repeat there before it goes into the actual like double snare hit. And here's how that sounds in the full mix.
Sometimes I can see right through myself. Less concerned about fitting into the world.
Yeah, so right there you can hear there's kind of an extra half repeat. So I had to really take pains to remember where that happens in the song. Because it just offsets things a little bit. There's one other spot where things are a little bit different within the drums, and that's that there's a snare fill leading into the second chorus, kind of a roll that doesn't really happen anywhere else. So I couldn't tell if there was a cymbal hit in the original song at the end of that snare fill, but I went ahead and added one. I thought it just added some nice intensity. So here's that bit. And then it goes into that open hi-hat bit of the chorus. All right, the next thing I recorded was the bass guitar, since it's really the other main foundational element of the song along with the drums. There isn't too much to say about the bass, except for the one thing I noticed in the original was there was a little bit of nuance in the performance where sometimes between that main line, that da-dum, down-dum, da-da-dum, down-dum, you actually kind of heard me do that there. There's this kind of chugga, this kind of double strum on the bass that just fills in some of the gaps. I really wanted to match that too, because what I was finding as I was listening to it more closely is that whenever those happen, it really did impact the momentum, and it made you feel the gaps where they weren't there much more strongly. So there's those, and there's these kind of lead-in notes. So I'm going to play a clip of the bass here and listen for what I'm talking about there. So when the bass completely stops, you really feel that emptiness a lot more, because between the riffs, the rest of the time, you get those little chicka. The next bits that I recorded after I had the drums and bass were the piano and tambourine, mostly just because they were easy. They only show up in a couple spots. The guitar and synth were feeling pretty intimidating to me, so I just wanted to get these out of the way. There's really not much to say about the piano. I more just wanted to make sure I played it delicately, because the performance itself doesn't feel very heavy-handed in the song. It's kind of nice and light, but then I just compressed it quite a bit because you still want it to have presence in the mix and not get drowned out by the other elements that are happening. So here's a clip of the piano. So just nice and light. It's really only there for the two choruses and then the intro that kind of mimics a chorus but without the vocals. But it's a really nice element. I think that Nine Inch Nails does a great job of always incorporating some kind of cool piano riffs into the songs, and this one's no different. Next up is the tambourine. In the video, you can see that I recorded the tambourine from across the room, laying on the couch that I've got back there. The reason for this is I like to record nearly every acoustic instrument with a condenser mic. They're a lot more sensitive than dynamic mics. I feel like I get more clarity and more room sound from them, which I like. I don't know if this is right or wrong. I'm kind of an amateur recording artist when it comes down to it. I'm very self-taught. So when it comes to little things like this, like how am I supposed to record a tambourine or a shaker? I just kind of go with my gut, and I always like how they sound through condenser mics rather than dynamic mics. The problem with this, though, is that tambourines are actually really loud when you record them. The signal comes in really strong, so you can't do it right next to the mic, or it's way too harsh. If I was using a dynamic mic, maybe I could. But I wanted to see how it would sound just giving myself some distance between the tambourine and the mic and trying it that way. So here's the tambourine clip. Tambourine is great. It just adds some nice sizzle to a mix. Here I actually made the tambourine a little bit busier, and I brought it up in the mix a bit more compared to the original, because I really just liked that rolling momentum that it brought to that part of the song. The next thing that I recorded after the drums, bass, piano, and tambourine was the vocals. This is actually a little different for me. I usually record vocals last, Usually you get all of your kind of foundational elements and then you leave some room in the mix for vocals and nest those in with everything else. But I switched that around here because of the unique nature of the guitars and synth. The role that those two instruments play in this song are not as foundational. They function more like sound design that just come in and out of the mix and sit on top where more intensity is needed or a certain riff is needed. It's not a part that's being played the whole time. And because the drum and bass are so flat and steady and repetitive, I thought I would have a much harder time knowing where I was in the song structurally if I recorded just to those. So the vocals provide a much better reference point for not only where are you in the song structurally, but also where are you dynamically. Are you at a high point? Are you at a low point? Because Trent does a really good job vocally of giving a certain element of power to his performance that matches the intensity of the song around it. So I use the vocals as kind of my guiding point for that, for when I added the rest of the song around it with the synth and guitar. So it took a while to practice these and really feel like I was getting it right. The song feels a little goofy and unnatural to sing. You have to take this kind of like talk singing style that feels a little bit sarcastic and defeated, but then you inject it with these moments of like resilience and this biting intensity. And it took several takes for me to really feel that out. Like, what is the right mood and style and attitude to put into this vocal performance? So here's a clip at the beginning of the song where you can kind of hear that on its own.
I'm becoming less defined as days go by, fading away, and well, you might say I'm losing focus.
That's also a good example of how most of this song is really just one vocal track, one vocal take. There aren't a ton of layers throughout the whole thing. Kind of similar to what he's doing with the guitar and synth. There are vocal layers that come in occasionally just for emphasis in very key points. But with a lot of rock songs like this, you kind of expect more vocal layers to be there all the time. So there are a few spots where there are higher harmonies that really stand out to me in the original, and those were fun to do. There were also some cool effects that I felt were really purposeful and served the song well. So I tried to recreate those also. So here is one spot with a high harmony that I really liked.
Sometimes I think I can see right through myself. Sometimes I think I can see right through myself. Sometimes I can see right through myself.
It's funny because you can hear when that harmony cuts off, it's kind of just this like, and I swear that that's there in the original. I listened really closely and I'm like, it's like he just cuts off in the middle of the words sometimes. And I could just be hearing that wrong, but I ended up kind of liking it once I paid attention to it more. So whether it's wrong or not, I decided to do it that way because I just thought it sounded cool. And that's kind of the nice thing about doing covers is that if you hear something that may not be exactly how it is in the original recording, who cares? It's a cover. You're making it your own anyway. So if you hear something in your head that you like, you just kind of get to roll with it. Who cares if you're wrong? All right, I'm going to play another clip here that starts out with just kind of a single vocal track. And then this cool effect comes in that I really tried hard to recreate where the vocals kind of wash out and pan from left to right. And then it comes back in with a really cool high harmony that ends up kind of layering and stacking. And I really liked how that sounded.
I think maybe it's because you were never really real to begin with. I just made you up to hurt myself. I just made you up to hurt myself, yeah. And I just made you up to hurt myself, yeah. And I just made you up to hurt myself, yeah. And I just made you up to hurt myself.
I really love that high harmony there. That's something that you got to keep in. It just adds so much attitude and flair to this song, I think. I'll play a clip of a later layer where you get some more intensity coming in with this really high bit that kind of turns into more of a scream, and I like how that sounded too.
And now I'm somewhere I'm not supposed to be, and I can see things I know I really shouldn't say, and now I know.
All right, touching real quickly now on the chorus. Normally for a heavy chorus like this, I would do multiple vocal layers. just to add a little bit more depth and intensity to the vocal track. But I think there's only one in the original, so I stuck with that. I think it serves the song well too, because with only one voice in there, it feels a bit more narrative. You know, the lyrics of this song are very introspective. Trent, or whatever character he's portraying in the song, kind of talking to himself. So I think that considering the lyrics, there is no you, there is only me, it really fits to have just one layer. And this was kind of a difficult chorus to sing, because once again, like, it's kind of singy, it's kind of talky, it's kind of rock, but there's also this kind of sass in there. And it was difficult to get, but I like how it turned out.
There is no you, there is only me. There is no you, there is only me. There is no fucking you, there is only me. There is no fucking you, there is only me. Only.
One thing about the production of the vocals too that's a little bit different for me is they're a little bit boxy. If you listen to the original, I kind of felt like a lot of the low end was kind of truncated just to help it fit into the mix more, and it also kind of fits better with the tight, small drum machine sounding drums. I tend to have a little bit more low end body in the vocals that I record on my own songs. I just like that sound, especially for more like acoustic up front and intimate songs. But this is clearly not that kind of song, so just a little bit different, and I think helped it match the original better. So last thing I did for this cover was go through and do the guitar and the synth layers. And this was a beast. There's a lot to go through here and a lot to dissect. To start, I just went and I had to plan things out a bit. I went through and I mapped each part on pen and paper. I listened through the whole song, and any time I heard a new element come into the mix that I hadn't already recorded, I jotted it down and I kind of like gave it my own little labeling system, like, okay, here's this funky synth. Here's this, noisy, shoegazy guitar. And I just tried to map out the layers. What I ended up mapping out were around 8 layers of guitar and 8 layers of synth in total. And it was hard for me to tell from the original what was synth and what was guitar, because Nine Inch Nails put so much distortion and additional effects on each layer that some of them seemed like they could be either guitar or synth. So I just kind of took my best guess, and sometimes I layered a guitar and a synth on top of each other if I wasn't sure and I didn't feel like my first pass at that layer was really giving me the sound that I wanted. Now, if you've listened to my music before, you know that I am not an electronic artist. I like to add synth and like samples and sound effects here or there as supporting layers in my music, but I'm much more rooted in your standard rock format: drum, bass, guitars, vocals, and auxiliary percussion, things like that. All of my software synths are really old. My keyboard itself, my MIDI controller, is really old. I'm just not really set up to do this kind of stuff very easily, and honestly, I just don't have that much fun with it. To me, it's not very fun to just sit and dink around with synth sounds for hours trying to get a sound perfect. For that reason, for the most part, what I did here is I just kind of, once I found a sound that was in the ballpark of what I was going for a certain layer, I would just roll with it. I stopped looking and I just used it, and then I used EQ and effects and so on to try to get the right sound that I was looking for. Sometimes this worked really well. I think that in this kind of like ominous one note bit, which is what I labeled it as when I was mapping this out, I think that this sounds pretty good. Not really the most fun thing to watch me play though, so I was trying to find ways to make it a bit more interesting. So that one turned out easily from the standpoint of like the sound itself, but other times I really had to fight it a bit. Like there's a part in the chorus where there's this kind of like layered piece. I wasn't sure if it was synth, I wasn't sure if it was guitar. I ended up doing both. And I actually didn't film myself recording this part because the end result doesn't sound at all how it looks because of how I recorded it. So I'm going to play this bit and then I'll walk you through how I did it. Okay, so what you hear there is this kind of rhythm where it's like dun 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 dun. That's what I was trying to recreate. But when I was trying to play that on the keyboard, doing that rhythm, that I was just kind of stabbing the key a lot with my finger, and it didn't sound very natural at all. It sounded pretty awful. I think that probably the way that it was done in the original is through some kind of arpeggiator or something that was providing and kind of mapping out that rhythm for it. Or maybe it was done in the production a little bit more manually. I just didn't want to take the time to do that. That sounded like a pain in the ass. So I'm also just not really deep enough into the electronica world to know how to do that well. I just wanted to get the damn thing done, so I achieved it in a very hacky way involving some sidechain compression and gating. How do I explain this? This is complicated. All right, I'm gonna give you a crash course in sidechain compression. In order to understand that, you also need to have an idea of what compression is. Some of you probably already know this, but for those of you who don't, I'll go through a quick explanation. So compression is something that's done in audio production very commonly, just to kind of squash the dynamic range of an individual track or component of a song. Basically making it so that the loud bits don't get too loud, bringing those down and curbing them a bit, and the quiet bits get a little bit louder. So that instead of having a track that's maybe a little bit all over the place in its dynamic range, it's a little bit more steady, it's a little bit consistent, it's compressed. Generally, what drives that compressor is the gain, the signal strength that's coming from the track itself. Once it gets too intense, it's pushed down a bit. But you can also set up in a lot of modern audio editing interfaces, you can set it up so that that compression is triggered by something else. This is something you hear a lot in electronic music, techno music, dance music, stuff like that, where maybe you have a big pounding bass drum or kick drum sound that you really want to have cut through the mix, but maybe there's also this very bass heavy like synth going on at the same time. What you can do is you can do what's called sidechain compression. You're basically having the compressor on that synth be triggered by the attack of that bass drum. So when the bass drum hits, boom, the synth comes down and leaves a little bit of space for that bass drum to cut through the mix. So I wanted to see if I could kind of tap out the rhythm using a sidechain compressor. So what I did that was really hacky to get this kind of like arpeggiated feel on this synth is I took a microphone, I took my handy SM58, and I just, on a separate track, I just tapped out the rhythm after I had already played the synth clean with no rhythm. So I just kind of held out the synth note, just da 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 da. And then on top of that, I took a mic and I just went ba 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 ba. And I tapped out that rhythm, and then I set up a sidechain compressor, and I found that that was actually the opposite of what I wanted, because I wanted the synth to play when I was hitting the mic, but because I was using a compressor, it was actually cutting out the synth whenever I was hitting the mic. So I needed the opposite of a compressor, which is essentially a gate, where a compressor will take those low bits and make them a bit higher, and the high bits and make them a bit lower. What a gate will do is basically set a threshold that says nothing above this input level, this volume, is going to make it through. But then once it does get above that, it's going to play it. So I set it up as a sidechain gate so that anytime I tapped the mic, the signal would boost and it would play the bits of the synth for when I was tapping the mic. I also then added a layer of guitar on top of that to make it sound a little bit more natural, but I kind of like the distorted, kind of messy, clangy sound that I ended up getting from it. So anyway, kind of a nice little workaround for me for what I was trying to accomplish there without really getting super complicated with the actual engineering of it. Another synth layer that's pretty prominent a couple places in this song is this one with this kind of EQ filter that's jumping around all over the place, and I'll play that one real quick. So that one is actually 3 different synth layers. I was having trouble getting the right sound out of just one layer. And I think that's pretty common in music production anyway, where you're looking for a bigger sound. You'll just layer several different parts playing the same line, the same melody. So that's what I ended up doing there. And then I sent them all to a bus and added this EQ filter to a bus that I was just kind of controlling manually. The end of this clip, though, is really fun, though. It gets really big, and I've got this kind of distorted static sitting on top of everything to provide some texture, and then that fast shoegazy guitar comes in, so I'll play this bit here. That one's a lot of fun. The guitar on this song in general was actually a lot of fun because there's a lot of noise on them, but underneath there's some really kind of fun, funky stuff happening. I mean, this song has kind of a dancey, driving vibe to it. So there's some kind of funky riffs that are just being obfuscated by distortion a little bit. So here is the original, and I've got this panned all the way to the left because this clip is mainly, this particular riff I want to focus on is mainly in the left channel, so you can hear it a little bit better in the original here. So that's the original, and then here's how I decided to do it. So despite my version still being very gritty and noisy, it's not like chopped out and as like disconnected and lo-fi as the original, so I actually think it comes through a little bit clearer. There's also this other kind of shoegazy layer that happens later on in the song, but what was interesting about this one is it's not really reverbed out in the way that you would think the shoegaze guitar line would be. It's actually more a quick delay than anything, and you can hear that if you're listening closely here. When I change notes and then at the end of the phrase, you can kind of hear where that delay is just carrying it on a little bit more, but then it cuts off. I think I just gated the end of that delay so that the tail of it wouldn't be too long. In general, the guitar layers in this song were really difficult to recreate because Nine Inch Nails is just so good at getting this gritty, zippery texture. And the distortions I was using didn't quite do that. I got it close enough that it was just kind of an area where I accepted that my version would be a little bit different, but I was okay with that. It sounded close enough to me. So the last thing that I wanted to highlight here is the guitar in the very last chorus. There's just some guitar that I have no idea what it's doing. And despite my repeated listens to this song and honing in on that area, it kind of sounded like just random guitar meandering around in either speaker. So that's basically what I did. I just started playing some random notes, and you can see in the performance video this too, that if it looks like I'm just kind of like doing whatever the hell on the fretboard, it's because I am. I really have no idea what I'm doing here. I was just kind of playing random notes just to get this cacophony of guitar happening. So I'll play that bit too. And this has the other synth layers that are in this chorus for reference as well. And that's it. Thanks everyone for watching. I hope that you found this informative and fun. As always, please subscribe to the channel. Let me know if there's a song that you would like to see me cover, because I have a lot of fun doing these, and maybe I'll do some more explanation videos like this in the future, if there are any songs that people are more interested in hearing a little bit more background on. So thanks again everyone for watching.